So if you have any questions, we'll be happy.
Really quick, just so we can get a time frame. What is the time frame now with the whole, foreclosure process just being inundated in courts? What's the time frame between foreclosure, or rather I should say missing a payment, and actually the auction itself? I see here it says about a year, but is that still the case?
It's at least a year, and very often much longer than a year, because now that they've slowed down the process, the traditional 1 year probably doesn't even apply anymore. But one thing that Derek said that I didn't have time to say, because I spent more time than I should have, is that with regard to the potential of filing a bankruptcy, you probably all know, or you should know, that a bankruptcy filing stays the action, or it freezes a bank or any creditor in place. And while Derek and I and other people who practice in bankruptcy, I've seen them all the time, by the way, in bankruptcy court, so I missed it. While a bankruptcy proceeding is filed, creditors can't do anything. They can't even call you. They can't write you. They can't send you love letters. Nothing. And that even drags out the process while we fight for a loss litigation, while we fight for a loan line. Folks, one of the things that's really important about bankruptcy that I wanted to tell you is, remember the example that we talked about, the 80-20, where most people borrowed 100%, got an 81st and 22nd? Bankruptcy court proceedings allow someone like myself or Derek to strip off that second mortgage, that 20%, in the event that the first mortgage has a higher value than your home. So if your home was bought for $500 and you got a first mortgage for $300 and a second mortgage for $200, and your house drops down to $299, we could walk into bankruptcy court as part of what we do and file a motion and strip off, completely eliminate that second mortgage. And with what I do every day, that is probably about the most effective tool that we have. Barring what the gentleman from HUD said, barring getting into some federal program, which, forgive me, they're not available enough. We have billions of dollars to go fight people all over the world, but we don't have money to protect our neighbors and friends. We lent money to banks. We lent money to banks called TARP, and we said, hey, here's money, flood the system with cash, no problem. But my neighbor needs a loan mod, it's basically screw you. That is disgusting, ladies and gentlemen. And people need to call up their representatives, as I mentioned before. I'm a little upset for that. I guess I drank too much coffee before I came here. Forgive me. I'm going to switch to the capital beverages. But this system and mortgage brokers, I'm not looking against mortgage brokers, but we should never have lent some of these people money that we lent for some of these houses they bought. But that's not the problem anymore. That's behind us. Now our job is to try to keep people in their homes and protect them. So, sorry for my long-winded answer, but it could be several years. To answer your question, it could take years.
5 years.
If they strip out the second mortgage, will there be tax consequences to it?
That's a great question. What happens when you have a forgiveness of debt? The traditional IRS response is what's called a 1099-C. But if it's your primary residence, you do not have to pay that forgiveness tax. What that really means is, if you bought a house for $500, and Derek and I, or HUD, or our friends over at the Housing Coalition couldn't help you, just couldn't help you for whatever reason. By the way, I'm sure we could all help you, but if we couldn't help you, and you decided, all right, I'm just going to sell my house at what's called a short sale, which we didn't have time to discuss today, but you know what that means. You're selling the house to a third party for less than what you actually owe. If you sell that $500,000 house, which now dropped down to $300, you sold it to somebody for $300. That $200,000 difference between the $500 that you bought it for and the $300,000 that you sold it to a third party, that's considered income under the IRS. That's what the 1099-C form is. If it's your primary residence, you don't have to pay it.
I also want to add that in bankruptcy, there's a bankruptcy exemption. So even if it's not your principal residence, if you're getting rid of it in bankruptcy court, like any debt that you get rid of bankruptcy court, there's no right.
Is it not true that you do not advise people to go bankrupt? Is it generally you advise people to?
Personally, on a personal level, I have found that the bankruptcy courts, and Derek is right, Judge Drain is a wonderful magnificent man who is kind to debtors. We had a judge who, 2 years ago, Judge Drain, Robert Drain, who replaced another judge only a couple of years ago, is a wonderful, decent person who cares about people. It's such a pleasure to practice in front of him. He really is a kind man. The judge that we had before him, I'm not naming names, never met a debtor he liked. Am I right? Yeah. I wouldn't argue about that. It's incredible, the difference in their style. So, to be honest with you, bankruptcies typically are often the best strategy that people have. Because not only do you shed that second mortgage and wipe out consumer debt, as Derek said, the New York State Legislature was very good to us in December. They passed new exemptions, where it used to be that if you, each debtor who filed a bankruptcy would only have a $50,000 real estate exemption. In English, what that means is, if you owned a house for $500 and you had mortgages of $450, you could file what's called a Chapter 7 plan. Well, it's not a plan, Chapter 7 filing. And you could wipe out $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 of credit card debt. By the way, that is the typical person who walks into my office has $50,000, $60,000 or more of credit card debt, which they will never ever be able to pay. So you can wipe out that credit card debt, and if your house is $500,000 and your mortgage is of $450,000, you can file that 7 under those circumstances and never have and keep your house as long as you pay your mortgage. But in December, the legislature passed a law that made it $150,000 a person. So a couple who owns a house worth $500,000, who has a $300,000 mortgage, who has that $50,000, $60,000 of credit card debt, the car that was taken repossessed from them, the other things that happened to them, the medical debt, which is number one cause of bankruptcies in America, is medical debt, which is one of the reasons why the president proposed the health care change, which we won't get into today. So now it's $150,000 per person. So $500,000 house, $300,000 mortgage. You can file bankruptcy under Chapter 7, wipe out all your credit card debt, keep your home. Chapter 13, as many of you know, is a plan. It's typically a 60-month, it's up to 60-month plan where you pay back some of your creditors. But typically, the way I've been doing it in my office, most of the plans that I file, creditors only pay back a couple $100 a month for those 5 years, and in some cases they shed hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there's a limitation, I think, of $366,000 of unsecured debt, and then there's the issue of the second mortgage that we talked about. There are so many things that lawyers can do, not just private lawyers, legal aid, but there are so many things that can be done to help people. If people only knew, you gotta fight the banks. The banks need a good, swift kick in the you-know-what.
As a real estate professional for quite a number of years, I was around during this whole time when these mortgages were given out. I have seen mortgage brokers assisting people, lying on their applications. The industry has been totally unregulated and continues to be unregulated. I would like to know why the homeowners who were sold these predatory loans can't sue the banks.
Well, actually, you can. Under TILA, there's different statutes that people can employ. Derek talked about it before, that when you challenge a foreclosure, that is one of the things that we do. We challenge the predatory nature of lending. We can do, there's a number of different defenses. What Derek talked about before was when loans were sold, I mentioned that they bundle them and they sell them to investors. He's right. That's a very common defense, and that defense usually, if it's legit, and there's many of them, and I handle that like he does, will get the banks to say, okay, you know what, we give up. We're going to give you a loan mod. That's actually one of the ways we get loan mods from banks. We say, listen, you have broken the law. You got fraudulent documents. You never filed those notes the proper way. You have violated the rules, and we're going to go after you unless you do something. And that's usually one of the ways we get loss litigation. By the way, the one exception to what I said earlier today about a loss litigation, a loan mod, typically never involves the forgiveness of arrears. The exception is when Derek and I or other lawyers who do this catch the banks cheating by not filing their papers properly. There have been instances where banks will say, whoa, we're caught red-handed, and they will will actually, in some cases, forgive arrears. It's rare, but it happens when they get caught breaking the rules under, truth in lending. TILA is Truth in Lending Act, and there are so many things that can be done to help you and your loved ones that by talking to real people. This gentleman made a very good point. There are a lot of scam artists out there who are telling people, I'm going to get you a loan modification. Folks, please, don't deal with people who you can't visit at their office, who you don't know. Don't do stuff over the phone. If you can't visit somebody, look at them in the eye, talk to them, visit in their office, don't give them money to help you. There are so many qualified people up in our area who can help you. Do you know that a third of the people that walk into my office say, Scott, I signed up for this loss mitigation with this company in Florida or Jersey or in Washington, and I gave them several $1,000s, and nothing's happened. And guess what? I'll never get that money back for them. They've wasted that money. That $3,000 or $4,000 they wasted, that's often enough to pay my entire fee for bankruptcy, for loss mitigation, for foreclosure defense, and that money was wasted. Please, go tell your friends and neighbors, people in church, synagogue, and mosque, go to people that you can go into their office, sit down and talk to them, and are responsive to you. Don't deal with people over the phone. There are so many scams out there. It really tarnishes the image of Derek and people like myself who really work hard for people who are committed to helping, and that's an important point.
We put a lot of information on the scams in the book for you.